Good day, students. How are you today? I hope everyone is doing well despite the pandemic. Okay, so today we are going to talk about consumption and cultural studies, but before that, let's do a little recap. So, from our past lesson, we defined cultural studies as an interdisciplinary field that studies how social structure shapes culture. So, Tony Bennett contended that it is concerned with all those practices, institutions, and systems of classification through which there are inculcated in a population particular values, beliefs, competencies, routines of life, and habitual forms of conduct. So, in other words, cultural studies aims to better understand, examine, and transform particular cultural behaviors. So now, our question will be, how or what is the relationship between cultural studies and consumption? So, for a variety of reasons, cultural studies is relevant to the study of consumption. So, despite the fact that there is a struggle between the ruling class and the ruled, as well as between capitalist society and the masses, Amanda Vickery believes that consuming should be considered as a positive contribution to the formation of culture and meaning. So she concentrated her research on how commodities are used and the diversity of meanings invested in possessions over time as they are placed in different contexts and in new interactions with other products. Okay, so one of the reasons cultural studies is relevant to the consumption is political in nature. So, for instance, despite the fact that the capitalist culture industries are a major site of ideological production, constructing powerful images, descriptions, definitions, frames of reference for understanding the world, cultural studies reject the view that to consume these productions is to become the hopeless victim of false consciousness. So that is for story. So some scholars believe that culture is not something that has already been created and is intended for consumption. So culture, on the other hand, is what people make in their daily lives, so including consumption. So consumption, according to Miller, entails the creation of culture. So, furthermore, rather than focusing solely on the means of population or the means of production, rather, or production itself, it is critical to include the vital functions of consumers beyond their economic function. So, questions of meaning, pleasure, ideological effect, incorporation, or resistance can be decided in the production in use. So, in other words, mass consumption is critical in the development of new cultural practices. So, let's do a little exercise. Using your imagination, what other uses or functions, aside from their original purpose, can you find for these pictures or everyday items that I will post? So, first, we have the old clothes. So, what other uses or functions can you think of? Okay, next let's have old bottles. And last one for this one, we have old newspapers. So, what other uses or functions can you think of for the pictures that I posted here? Okay, so identifying inventive ways to use common items in doing so on a regular basis, according to the exercise that we did, is a process of meaning making and culture making in and of itself. So the fact that people utilize certain goods in ways that are unrelated to their original purpose indicates that they are not only consumer of products that are subconsciously imposed as a need by capitalist society. As you can see, the first picture that I posted, the old cloth can be transferred into another cloth with a new style. So you can do a DIY or do it yourself, okay, in making your new clothes from the old one. Another is for the old bottles. You can actually use them for your plants as a plantito or plantita, and of course the newspapers, old newspapers. I know some of you knew or have probably done it before. Use it in making vases. Okay, so now, this time, let's try to travel back in time at least 10 years. Uh, okay, so can you tell me, have you gone through this? Okay, I will show you another one and then think of this question. So, why did you engage in these kinds of practices? Or what do you think of people who have gone through this? So, were these practices relevant at all? Okay, I'm going to show you another one.
Hey yo, listen carefully. Makinig yung muna to me. Ako'y may konting sasabihin.
Okay, so does this clips bring back memories? Okay, so again, think of this question. So, first, have you gone through these stages or phases? I think we all do, right? And of course, why did you engage in these kinds of practices, or why do you think people, or what do you think of people who have gone through this, and were these practices relevant at all? Of course, at this time. Okay. So now let's continue our discussion. Now let's go to the subcultural consumption. So a separate cultural group that persists as an identifiable part within a broader, more complicated society is referred to as a subculture. Okay, so according to Skiffman and Canuck, individuals of a subculture typically have ideas, values, and customs that are distinct from those of other members of the same community. So the relationship between cultural studies and consumption begins with studies on youth subcultures. So consumption is how youth subcultures communicate according to story. So according to Paul Cohen, the underlying function of subculture is to articulate and resolve the parent culture's unresolved conflicts. So as a result, subcultures are defined as a compromise solution to two contradictory needs. First is the need to create, and the other one is the need to express autonomy and difference from parents, and of course, the need to maintain parental identifications. Okay, so let's try to look at some of the subcultures we have in the Philippines in terms of music and passion. Sorry. Okay, there you go. Okay, so we have, of course, the K-pop. Let me go back there. Okay, the K-pop. Okay, if you know the BTS. Okay, and J-pop. And of course, we have the Beanie, so P-pop. Okay, so these three are examples of subcultures that we have in the Philippines. So members of these subcultures, okay, their fans, have or shares common interests, own standards, beliefs, and even the language, and the meaning of which are impenetrable to outsiders. Okay, so subcultural consumption, according to story, is a consumption at its most discriminating. So subcultures appropriate mass-produce things for their own goals and meanings through a process known as bricolage, meaning they combine items coming from different sources to create a new whole. So they exhibit rejection of the meaning or rejection to the meaning put on the commodity through this appropriation, therefore challenging the dominant ideology of the parent culture. Okay, so to summarize, subculture emerges as a result of some demographic segments' lack of exposure to mainstream culture, and on the other hand, their embrace of alternative integral beliefs. So it was accepted by society as a fashionable way of expressing oneself. So that's the end of our discussion for today. Thank you for listening.